Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today I'm going to discuss about the evaluation technique, and this is the lecture number 6. The lecture has been already uploaded on the website, so you can see the lecture slide, and in addition to the lecture slide you can listen my voice in this video. So let's see that what are the topic for this lecture. We are going to discuss about the evaluation. When we talk about the evaluation, the meaning is that we have to evaluate our design, and we have to see that either the design is meeting the user requirement or not. Because for any software, for any product, initially we are collecting the requirement from the user, and it is very essential, it is very important that we assess our design and test the system to make sure that we are fulfilling the user requirement. And one important thing about evaluation is that we should not think that we are going to perform the evaluation at the end of the software design cycle, but the evaluation should be done throughout the design process. Otherwise it may cause the problem that design is not according to the user requirement. Basically, evaluation tests the usability and the functionality of the system. So in the evaluation we have to test that what are the usability requirements are there. For example, some of the usability requirement is that the system should be easy to use, it should be easy to learn, it should provide a utility, and it should be effective and efficient. So we have to test these usability criteria in the evaluation. And also, in addition to that, we have to test the functionality of the system. Functionality means that what we are expecting from the system, either it is performing that job or not. Maybe we can say that, for example, the system has a very good interface and easy to use, but it is not performing the right function, so it will not be acceptable. So both the usability and the functionality must have to be tested, it must have to be evaluated. The next thing is that we can perform the evaluation either in the laboratory or in the field, or maybe in both the places. Laboratory means that where we are making the software, it is not the place where it is going to be used finally. And when we talk about the field, the meaning is that it is the place where the final product is going to be used. For example, if we are making or designing a software for the banking, then the field is the bank where finally it is going to be used. And another important thing in the evaluation is that we can perform the evaluation with the collaboration of the user and without the collaboration of the user. So sometimes initially we perform the evaluation without the actual users, but finally we have to perform the evaluation with the user, so the user can use the system and can give the feedback about the system. And we have to evaluate both the design and the implementation, and this should be remain a kind of iterative process. If there is some problem during the evaluation, we have to correct the step, and then we have to recheck the system. And that's why we are saying that it is important that evaluation is done throughout the design life cycle. Now let's see that what are the goals of the evaluation. Assess the extent of the system functionality. So it must be according to the requirement. So whatever requirements are there about the function, the system should perform this function, the system should perform this function. For example, the system should allow the user to log in, the system should have a password. So we are going to test these things. So these are the functionalities. Evaluation is going to see that either the functionality is being fulfilled or not. And then assess the effect of the interface on the user. The system, especially in the software, has an interface and which has the many components. So how the user is going to be affected by this interface, what are the user reactions are there, either user is feeling comfortable or not. We have to check these things during the evaluation. For example, how easy the system is to learn. So one of the usability criteria is that the system should be easy to learn. So this should be checked during the evaluation process. Let me see if the recording is going. Yes, fine. So how the system is, how easy the system is to learn. So this is the criteria we have to check. Its usability, for example, the system should be efficient, effective, safe, and it should provide the good utility. So these things should be checked during the evaluation. And the user is satisfied with the system. So the user satisfaction is very important criteria for the evaluation, and we have to done this thing in collaboration with the user. And the next goal of the evaluation is that identify the specific problem. During the evaluation, we might find some problem. There might be some unexpected results. Maybe the system is not performing the right functionality, or maybe the system is not, the user is not satisfied with the system, or maybe the system is not very efficient. So these problems have to be identified during the evaluation, and then they have to be solved. Now let's talk about the evaluating the design without the user participation. So in this evaluation, we are not asking the user to participate in the evaluation process. So the meaning is that this is without the collaboration of the user. So in this type of the evaluation, we are going to discuss about the three types of the evaluation: cognitive walkthrough, heuristic evaluation, and the review based evaluation. Now we are going to discuss each of them one by one. The first one is the cognitive walkthrough. Let's see what is a cognitive walkthrough. Cognitive walkthrough is a usability inspection method used to identify the usability issues in iterative system. So we have to identify the usability issue in the interactive system. Interactive system means that the user interacting with the system. And let's see that we have discussed the usability. So in the usability, we have to evaluate the system should be efficient, it should be effective, it should be safe, it should provide the utility, and it should be easy to learn. So all of these things have to be checked during the cognitive walkthrough. Focusing on how easy it is for new user to accomplish the task with the system. So we are going to check this thing, the user can perform the task whatever the system is supposed to do. Cognitive walkthrough is a task specific. So we are going to define some task, and then we have to check the user can perform this task easily or not, it is efficient or not, it is providing a good utility or not. Usually performed by the expert. So in the cognitive walkthrough, important point is that usually it is performed by the expert. And as we have mentioned that these are the evaluation techniques which are being performed without the user participation. So usually performed by the expert in the cognitive psychology. So cognitive process are those process by which we are learning something. For example, we are using our senses, we are solving some problem, and we are trying to understand some system. So we are using our cognitive skill, our learning, our brain, our senses are being used in the cognitive process. Expert walk through design to identify the potential problem using the psychological principle. So when we use the word walkthrough, the walkthrough means that expert is going to look at the system step by step in a process and according to certain specific criteria, and it is going to see that either the system is fulfilling the requirement, fulfilling the task or not. That's what is called the cognitive walkthrough. For each task walkthrough consider, because we have said that the cognitive walkthrough is a task specific. So there can be the multiple tasks we have to evaluate in the system. So for each task in the cognitive walkthrough, we have to consider what impact will the interaction have on the user. So what is the impact the task is going to perform on the user? Maybe the user is satisfied, or user is find difficult to learn this task, user is taking too much time. We have to evaluate these impact from the perspective of the user. What cognitive process are required? So as I told you that in the cognitive sciences, in the cognitive psychology, we are trying to understand that how the humans are learning something. They are using their senses, they are using their problem solving skill, their analytical skill to learn something. So we have to analyze that what things are required there. Either short term memory is required there, long term memory is required there, or hearing, or the sensing, or something like a vision skills are being used during the cognitive from the cognitive process during the cognitive walkthrough. What learning problems may occur? So because the user is supposed to use the system without the difficulty, it should be easy to learn. So if it is that it is not the case, user is encountering some problem, it is finding difficult to learn the system, then we have to identify these problems, and then later on we have to solve these problems. Analyze, does the design lead the user to generate the correct goals? So each task has some goal that we have to achieve these goals. So after the cognitive walkthrough evaluation, we have to analyze that either the user can achieve the goals or not. If it is achieving, then how much time it is taking, what cognitive processes are being used there, we have to note it down these things. The next step of the evaluation is the heuristic evaluation. So as we have discussed that we are going to discuss the technique in which the user is not participating. So we have discussed the cognitive walkthrough. Now we are going to discuss about the heuristic evaluation. So let's see about the heuristic evaluation. A heuristic is a recognized usability principle to guide a design decision. So in the heuristic evaluation, we are going to use some usability principle, and which is going to guide us to make some decision about the design. Either the design or the system is fulfilling that usability principle or not. So in this type of the evaluation, we have to choose some usability principle. It may be one or it may be more than one. So these principles are going to guide us about the design, either the design is fulfilling or meeting these usability principle or not. Design examined by expert to see if these are violated or not. So the expert person is going to evaluate the design based on the usability principle, and they are going to see that either these principles are going to be violated or not. For example, one of the usability principle is that the system should be easy to learn. So by using this principle, we have to evaluate the design, and then we have to design either this is going to be fulfilled or not. The system is easy to learn or not. The main goal of the heuristic evaluation is to identify any problem associated with the design of the user interface. So we have to use the heuristic evaluation, and our goal is that we have to identify the problems in the design. So some of the example heuristics are: system behavior is predictable. System behavior is predictable means that when the user is using the system, the user should have the idea that by doing this action what is going to happen. For example, if the user is using some drawing program, then if it is using some rectangle icon, and then he or she drag the mouse over the frame or the canvas, then he can make an assumption, or he can predict that it is going to draw the rectangle. So we can say that a system behavior is predictable. But if it is not doing that, it is not drawing the rectangle, then we can say that the system behavior is not predictable. So we have to evaluate that either the system behavior is predictable or not. The second example for the heuristic evaluation is that, for example, the heuristic can be system behavior is consistent. Consistent means that we are going to use it again and again, it is going to behave in the same manner. It should not happen that one time it is behaving in the right way, but the other time it is not behaving in the right way. So this can be the heuristic. Based on the heuristic, we have to evaluate the system. So heuristic is something like a principle or the guideline, and based on the heuristic, we are evaluating the system, either the system is fulfilling this guideline or this heuristic or not. For third example for the heuristic is the feedback is the provided. So in many of the system, we are expecting that when the user is doing something, some kind of feedback is provided to the user, so the user can know that the task has been achieved or it has performed the task. So this is a kind of the feedback. So this should be provided in the system. For example, if you are selecting something, then maybe it's very small dotted rectangle can be shown around the item to make sure that the user has selected this item. Or sometimes we are pressing the button for some of the interfaces, then a kind of feedback, for example a click sound or something, should be provided, so the user do not need to press the button again and again. So these are heuristics. So we have to check the system, either the system is providing the feedback or not. The third kind of the evaluation in which the user is not participating is the review-based evaluation. Results from the literature used to support or refute part of the design. So in this evaluation, we are referring towards some kind of research paper, some kind of literature, some kind of book, and we are going to see that either the design is going to fulfill these principles which are being mentioned in the literature or not. Care needed to ensure results are transferable to the new designs. So usually when we are using this kind of evaluation, it should happen that if we are designing some new product, then the results can be transferred to the new design or to the new product. Design rationale can also provide a useful evaluation information. Design rationale means that when we are designing something, there should be some logic, there should be some sense, there should be something, understanding should be there why we are designing in this way, why we are providing this kind of input, why we are providing this kind of output. So when we are doing the review based evaluation, the design rationale can provide us the information that either the design is fulfilling that rationale or not. What was the principle behind the design? So either once the product is available, when the product is being tested or evaluated, either this design rationale is being fulfilled or not. We have discussed the evaluation without the user participation. Now we are going to talk about the evaluating the system or the design through the user participation. So in this we can do the two kind of evaluation, one in the laboratory and one in the field. So let's talk about the advantage and the disadvantages for each of them. So first is the laboratory studies. The laboratory studies is that we are going to test the system, we are going to test the design in the laboratory where we are making the system, and usually it is not the place where it is going to be used finally. So advantages for the laboratory studies are there. Specialist equipments are available. We might use some of the equipments which might not be available in the actual place where the system is going to be used. They might be expensive or they need some special kind of things to use. So this is the advantage that in a laboratory we can use these equipments to test the system. The second advantage for the laboratory study is that this is the uninterrupted environment. Uninterrupted means that there is no disturbance there. We can perform the evaluation without a disturbance. There is no noise is there. People are not walking in the laboratory. They are just sitting and working calmly. So here they can perform the evaluation with much comfortable environment. But there are some disadvantages there for the laboratory studies or the laboratory evaluation. Lack of the context. Lack of the context means that sometimes we have to check the system in the actual environment, because the actual environment might be different than the laboratory environment, and system performance may be affected depending on the context. For example, there are some ATM machines are there which are installed outside. They are the drive-through machine. So they should be robust enough so they can bear the temperature, high temperature. If there is some raining is there or light is there, the people can see the screen. So this is the actual environment where the ATM machine has to be used. But if we are testing inside the very calm and quiet environment where the temperature is very normal, very good temperature, and light is enough there, so we might not able to see the performance of the system when it is going to be used in the actual context. So this can be a disadvantage if we are evaluating the system in the laboratory. Difficult to observe the several users cooperating, and in the laboratory studies, because the actual users are not there usually, and if they are there, they might not be all the users are there. So how they are going to be cooperate with each other, we cannot observe these things in the laboratory studies. So we can conclude that laboratory studies are appropriate if the system location is dangerous or impractical. So if it is not possible that we can test the design in the actual context, then laboratory studies is suitable. But it is better that for most of the system we perform the laboratory evaluation. In addition to that, we also perform the field studies. The second is the field studies. We have to evaluate the system and the design in the actual environment where it is going to be used finally. So there are some disadvantages are there, there are some disadvantages are there. So advantages are there, natural environment is available there where we are going to use the system, and the context is retained. As I told you that, for example, the ATM machine is there which is being used outside something like a drive-through, so we can retain the context if we are doing the field studies. Longitudinal studies are possible, so we can perform the testing for the long period of the time if the environment is actual, because in the laboratory there might be some other design has to be evaluated, or maybe some other product have to be developed, so we cannot perform the very testing for a very long time. But in the field we can perform the longitudinal studies which are going to take the time, maybe 1 month or maybe 2 months, like this thing. But there are some disadvantages are there for the field studies. Some distractions are there, people may be talking, some noise is there, and it is difficult to focus on, concentrate on the evaluation. So we can conclude that field studies are appropriate where the context is crucial. So context is the crucial. Actual environment is very important for longitudinal studies for the long period of the time. Now let's talk about the evaluating implementation. So we have to evaluate the implementation, that whatever product we are developing, either it is fulfilling the user requirement or not. So this required an artifact, something which is tangible, which the user can use it and user can give the feedback, not something like a theoretical. So it can be a simulation, some software simulation, it can be the prototype, or it can be the full implementation. So all the three possibilities are there in case for evaluating the implementation. We can evaluate the system by the simulation, by some programming, or by some small model, or maybe the complete system is available for the evaluation. So let's talk about this in further detail. Experimental evaluation, control evaluation of the specific aspect of the interactive behavior. So in the experimental evaluation we are try to evaluate the behavior of the interactive system, how it is going to behave. Evaluator chooses hypothesis to be tested. So the person who is doing the evaluation, he is going to make some hypothesis, some kind of principle, some kind of theory, some kind of guideline is there, and then going to evaluate the system based on this hypothesis. What can be the hypothesis? For example, error rate will increase as the font size decreases. In some of the system, for example like a word processor, we can change the font size. So we are making the hypothesis that if we are going to decrease the font size, then it is going to affect the error rate. So if the font size is going to be small, the user is going to do the errors, user are going to do the more mistake, maybe in the typing or maybe in the reading. So this is the hypothesis. So we have to test the system based on this hypothesis. So if we can say alternatively, if the font size is being increased, the error rate is going to be decreased. A number of experimental conditions are considered which differ only in the value of some control variable. So in case for the experimental evaluation, we are going to test the system based on some hypothesis, and using this hypothesis we are changing some variable. We are changing the value of some variable. For example, our variable can be the font size. Then we are going to see that what effects are being there in the system when we are changing this variable. For example, what the error rate is there if we have certain value for the font size. Changing the behavior measures are attributed to a different condition. So when the system is showing the behavior and which is based on some variable, then we can measure these things and we can make a conclusion that either the hypothesis is correct or not. So there are some experimental factors are there. There are some categories or some types of the experimental factors are there. Subjects, which are the people. For example, the people can be the operators, they can be the managers, or they can be some other people who are going to use the system. So they are the subject. The next experimental factor is the variable, things to modify and measure. So as I told you that we have to make some hypothesis. In the hypothesis there are going to be some variables. We are going to change the variables and then we are going to notice down the effect of these variables on the other things or maybe on the other variables. For example, we can say that font size is a variable and how it is going to be affected on the other variables or the other things which are, for example, like a error rate. Hypothesis, what you would like to show. So here we give the example for the hypothesis that error rate will increase as the font size decrease. So this hypothesis have to be tested. It may be correct or it may not be correct based on the experiment. Experimental design, how you are going to do this thing. So you have to design some way that you are going to test this thing. So you should have some kind of interface or some kind of data collection should be there, which are going to design the experiment and measure these effects of variables on the other variables. Let me go back here. Let me discard this thing. Here I give you the example for the hypothesis. Now we are going to discuss the hypothesis in a little bit more detail. Here I told you that we are going to measure the effect of one variable on the other. For example, I say that this can be a variable. We are changing the font size, and we are going to measure that how the change in the font size is going to affect the error rate. So this is the things we are controlling, and we are measuring that how this is going to affect on the other variable. So we are going to make the categories for the variable. So there are the two categories are there: independent variable, which is called the IV, and the second is the dependent variable, which is short form DV. Independent variables are those elements of the experiment that are manipulated to produce the different condition for the comparison. So these are the variables which we are going to manipulate, which we are going to change. We are going to change their variables, and by changing these variables they are going to affect something other. So we are going to measure the effect on the other things, on the other parameter. So the variable which we are controlling, they are called the independent variables. And what are the dependent variable? For let me give the example for the independent variable. The example for the independent variable is the font size. What are the dependent variable? Dependent variables are measured in the experiment. Their value is dependent on the changes made to the independent variables. So the dependent variables are going to be changed. Why? Because we are modifying the dependent variable. We are not modifying the dependent variable directly, but they are going to be affected by modifying the independent variable. So error rate in the example is kind of dependent variable. So this is a dependent variable, and this is the independent variable. Because we are modifying the independent variable, which is the font size, it is going to change the error rate, which is going to be the dependent variable. Hypothesis, we have given the example for the hypothesis. Error rate will increase as the font size decreases. So now we are explicitly mentioned that font size is the dependent variable and the error rate is the dependent variable. So we are playing with the font size, and we are measuring the effect on the error rate. The next thing is the analysis of the data in case for the experiments. Before you start to do any statistics, look at the data and save the original data. So because many times it happens that your experiment can modify the data. So you should look at your data carefully, and you should keep a backup of the original data. So it should not be distorted or it should not be modified. Later on you can again use it. Now there are the different type of the data are there. We can make a classification. Here we are doing the two classification of the data. One is the discrete and the second is the continuous. What is the discrete data? Finite number of values, where the values are finite, they are limited. For example, the number of menu items. For example, if you have an interface, for example in the interface there are the menus are there. For example, like a file menu, like a edit menu. The number of items in the menus are going to be limited. They are not going to be infinite. For example, in the file we may have a menu item like a save, like a open, like a close, like a print. So these are the discrete type of the data. The second type of the data is the continuous data, which is something like infinite values are there. For example, the time. So when we are measuring, for example, the temperature over the time is like a continuous. So there is no space between the time. It is going to like a continuous. So if we are going to plot the curve of the time, so it is going to be go without interruption. So it is going to go like a straight line. So you will not find any break in the continuous data. Now let's talk about the experimental studies on the groups. So we are doing the experimental studies, but we are performing on the group, not on the individual. So many people are involved in these studies. They are more difficult than the single user experiment. So if we are performing the experiment, if the users are being involved there and we are testing the system and the multiple users are there, then it will be difficult. Why? There can be subject groups. So usually in the organization, different people belong to the different department or the different sections. So we have to choose the people from the different subjects or from the different division. Maybe one from the marketing, one from the accounting, one from the finance, like this thing. So otherwise we are not going to correctly evaluate the system. The next thing is that when we are evaluating or we are doing the experimental analysis, then the choice of the task, which task we are choosing to perform the analysis or to perform the experiment, because there can be the multiple tasks. One group like to choose one type of the task, other group may like to choose the other type of the task. So this can be the problem. Data gathering between the people can be the difficult, because this is not the individual person. So collecting the data from the many people is going to be difficult. And then analysis can be difficult, because the people in the group they may have a different understanding, they may have a different idea, and their experience can be different in the experiment. So analysis can be difficult. Now let's talk about the observational method for the evaluation. So we are going to observe that how the user is going to use the system. By the observation we are going to perform the evaluation. So in the observational evaluation method, many methods are there, like a think aloud, cooperative evaluation, protocol analysis, automated analysis, post task, walkthrough. We might not discuss all of them, but we are going to discuss some of them. So first is the think aloud. So we are thinking, but we are thinking aloudly. We are talking during the thinking. So in this type of the evaluation, user observe performing tasks. So we are going to observe the user who is performing the task. We are observing the user, and the user asked to describe what he is doing and why, what he think is happening. So the user, when the user is using the system, he is not using the system quietly. He has to describe that what he is doing, what task he is doing, and why he is doing this task, and what he thinks when he is using the system and when he is doing this task. So when the user is going to talk about these things, we are going to observe this thing. So advantage for the think aloud is that this is a simple method, requires a little expertise. So the user can use the system and he is going to express himself or herself, and we are going to observe this thing. So there is no complication is there, and this can provide the useful insight. Maybe the user is find something difficult to do, so he is going to tell this thing, I am not finding this icon, I don't know how to do this thing. So by observing the user, by listening his words, we can identify the problems in the system and can show how the system is actually used. So because actual user is using the system, so we have the idea that how it is actually being used, because maybe the designers because they have designed the system, they better understand it. They will not do the mistake. They know that where the icons are there, where the buttons are there, how to move from one screen to the other screen. But maybe the actual user don't know this thing. So when the actual user using the things, we better understand that how the system is being actually used. But this can be some disadvantages can be there in the think aloud. For example, this can be the subjective. Subjective means that maybe some people are expert in the using the system. If we are choosing them for the think aloud, they may not find it difficult to use. But maybe other users, they will not be so much expert and they cannot use the system with so much easiness or with so much comfortable. And this can be selective. You cannot ask all the user to participate in the think aloud, because you cannot observe all the users. There can be so many large number of people are there, so you have to select some people. Act of describing may alter the task performance. So when the user is describing, he is talking about the system, so this can affect the performance of the user. So this can be the problem in the think aloud. The second type of the evaluation is the cooperative evaluation. This is a kind of variation on the think aloud. user collaborate in the evaluation. Both the user and the evaluator can ask each other question throughout. So in this evaluation, the user and the evaluator, they can talk, they can communicate. In the previous case, only the user is talking, evaluator is just observing. But in case for the cooperative evaluation, the user and the evaluator, they can cooperate and they can talk with each other. So this can be a advantage for this cooperative evaluation, less constrained and easier to use, because the user is free to ask or free to talk with the evaluator, so might be feel comfortable if some problem is there, he can discuss with the evaluator. And the user is encouraged to criticize the system, so he can find out some flaws or some problem and he can talk about this problem with the evaluator. The next step of the evaluation is the protocol analysis. Now we are talking about in the observation method. So we have discussed about the think aloud, we have discussed about the cooperative evaluation, now we are discussing about the protocol analysis. Protocol analysis are the method for recording the user action, and this includes the following. So we are recording, so important word is here, we are recording the user, whatever the user is doing, we have to record this thing. Now there can be the different mechanism for the recording. For example, paper and the pencil. Just we have a simple paper, we have a simple pencil, whatever the user is doing, we are writing this thing on the paper. So this is a cheap method for the analysis, but limited to writing speed, because if the user is doing so many action, we might not able to write all of them perfectly. The second way for the protocol analysis is the audio. We are recording the audio, good for think aloud. So if the user is talking during the using of the system, we can record it. So it is better that just we are listening and then analyzing, so we might miss something. So it's better that we record during the think aloud evaluation, and later on we can repeat the audio again and again to better understand the how the user is using the system, or to better evaluate it. Difficult to match with the other protocol, so it is not going to be matched with the other protocol in a sense that this is a kind of different thing is there in this protocol. Next thing is the video. We are recording the video accurate and the realistic. So usually in the video we are not only have a voice of the user, but we have also the picture, how it is performing, because some of the tasks it is better that not only we have the audio of the user, but also we have the picture, so we can monitor, we can observe that how the user is doing the action. Need the special equipment, so we have to install the cameras, maybe multiple cameras are required there, and this can be the obtrusive, so this can obstruct the other people. The next one is the computer logging. So computer is automatically logging every task the user is doing, whatever the key the user is pressing, whatever the icon the user is selecting, it is being automatically logged into the computer. So a log file is being generated. So this automatic and the unobtrusive process, large amount of data is being generated, which can be difficult to analyze, because everything is being recorded since the user start to use the system from the login until the user log out. Everything is being logged in the computer, so a big log file can be generated, and which might be difficult for the humans to analyze. Maybe some automated software or tools can be used to analyze the log file. So this is the protocol analysis. A next kind of evaluation is the query technique. In the query technique we are going to discuss about the interviews and the questionnaires. Interviews, analysts questions user on one-to-one basis. So the person who is doing the evaluation, we call the person as an analyst. He is asking the user question, but on the one-to-one basis. So he go to a person, single person, and asking the question from the user, anything about the system, how the user is using the system, what difficulty he is facing. So anything can be asked. This is informal, subjective, and relatively cheap. Subjective means that we have to choose a person, we cannot select all the people in the organization, and this is the informal way, because we are not recording things, just we are talking. And relatively cheap mechanism is there, we do not need the special equipment. Advantages there can be varied to suit the context. So whatever the context is there, we can go to the context, we can go to the environment, we can go to the organization and do the interview. Issues can be explored more fully. So when we are talking with the users, so the user can talk in detail. So it may take time, but the full picture of the situation can be clear to the user. Can elicit user views and identify the unanticipated problem. So because we are talking with the user and we are asking anything and the user can say anything, so many of the potential problems which are difficult to describe, which are difficult to mention, can be identified during the interview. But there are some disadvantages. They are very subjective, because we cannot interview all the people and they take the time, they are the time consuming. The next way for the evaluation in the query based technique is the questionnaires. So they are the set of fixed questions given to the users. So we can give the question to many users. Large number of users can be there. For example, 100 users are there, we can distribute the questionnaires. Advantages are there, they are quick and reach the large user group. So it might take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and we can distribute the question to 100 people, and then we can have a feedback from these people. Can be analyzed more rigorously. More rigorous analyze meaning is that because we have something recorded, we have on the paper, or maybe we are recording on the software, so later on we can analyze it, we can analyze the answer of the user, and we can come to the conclusion that how the multiple users or a lot of users are going to or what are their feedbacks are there, and how they are using the system, what difficulties are there. But based on the fixed question, the user cannot describe anything which is not written in the question. So the disadvantage there, this is the less flexible. Why the less flexible? As I told you that we already defined the set of the questions, so the user is limited to answer only these questions. If something is not written in the question, user cannot answer this thing. And it is also the less probing. What mean by the less probing? We cannot dig deep into the detail, because in case for the interview, we can ask the further question from the user to come out to get the more detail about the problem. But in case for the questionnaire, just the user is answering, maybe multiple answers are there, user have to select one, or maybe some labels are there for the rating between 1 and 5. So we cannot go into the deep to understand more about the problem. So this can be the less probing. Now there are some psychological methods are there for the evaluation. For example, the eye tracking and the psychological measurement. What is eye tracking? Head or desk mounted equipment track the position of the eye. When the user is using the system, we are monitoring that where the user eye are focused on, where it is looking. So maybe the screen have multiple sections are there, so we have to monitor that on which section the user is more focusing on, or where the user is spending most of the time. Though this technique is a bit difficult, but it is being used in some of the evaluations. A movement reflects the amount of cognitive processing or display required. So as I told you that in a screen we may have multiple sections are there. So when the user is focusing on some of the sections, then we can know that what processes, cognitive process is using, and why this part is difficult or why this part is easy, and why the user is spending so much time to learn this part of the system. In the psychological methods, the next is the psychological measurement, more than one. Emotional response linked to the physical changes. So when the user is using the system, then there might be some emotionals are there. User is expressing some emotional, and we want to record these emotional, because when emotions are there, these emotions can cause some changes in the physical part of the body, or in some of the senses of the user. These may help determine the user reaction to an interface. So these measurement include, so in the psychological measurement, what we can monitor or what we can measure, for example, the heart activity, including the blood pressure, volume, and the pulse rate. So maybe for some of the games or for some of the intensive tasks, the heart rate can be changed, the heart rate can be increased, the blood pressure can increase. So we can monitor these things, and we can know that which part of the systems are affecting the heart and the blood pressure and the pulse rate of the user. Activity of the sweat glands, so we can monitor these things, but some kind of sensors are required there. Electrical activity in the muscles. especially in the system which are designed for the medicals. We can measure the muscle activity, maybe some kind of physiotherapy is being used there to measure performance of the user, so we can measure the muscle activity of the user to check his performance, or the electrical activity in the brain, maybe for some special people or maybe some people who are disabled. They are trying to control the system by the brain, so we can have some kind of sensor on the brain, and we can measure that which part of the brain is being used to control of the system, the right part or the left part or something like this thing. So this is the end of the lecture about the evaluation. Some references are there, and then disclaimer and the fair user statements are there.